Hello and welcome to Dirty Christianity, the show where we investigate, explore, challenge, and get down and dirty with Christianity. My name is Alex, and you are about to be watching a very special episode that has been months in the making. When I first started this channel, one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize and prioritize was telling stories and perspectives that often get overlooked or just don't get the attention that they deserve. Enter the United States Institute of Peace. This nonprofit organization was founded by Congress with the explicit goal of fostering relationships and building lasting peace across conflict zones all across the world. This fantastic organization was unfortunately targeted, slandered, and shut down by the Trump administration and DOGE under Elon Musk in March of this year. Although there have been some legal battles going forth, it currently does remain shut down. So why bring this up? Why on Dirty Christianity are we talking about one of the many organizations that the Trump administration targeted and shut down? Well, if you think about it, what is one of the most popular names for our Lord and Savior? We call him the Prince of Peace. One of the most famous Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers. We talk all the time in Christian circles about the peace of God, peace being a foundational and important part of our Christian faith. And here you have the Institute of Peace, a part of the government that is focused entirely on building lasting relationships and lasting peace across the world. I can't imagine a more Christ-like thing to focus on. And so I reached out to a couple contacts I had at the Institute who were happy to speak with me about their side of the story, what the Institute was, and what we lose if it remains shut down. I would like to make one final point, though, before we begin the interview. Due to the climate of fear and targeted political retribution that the Trump administration has created during his time in office, my contacts, although eager to speak with me, were only able to safely do so under conditions of total anonymity. They are not whistleblowers, they are not leaking classified information, they are not saying or doing anything illegal. And yet, they are not able to safely speak with me openly and publicly. It has to be done anonymously. Thus, for the interviewers, I have some fantastic voiceover artists who were willing to give their time to help these stories come to life. And unfortunately, the voiceover artists that I brought in to help tell this story also only agreed to do so under conditions of anonymity. And so although everybody involved loved the idea and were eager to help make it a reality, that is where we are as a country right now. The level of fear and genuine concern for retaliation from this administration has made it that everybody involved in this is in fear for their professional and personal futures. But that is why it's even more important to tell it. So, without further ado, the first question I asked, simple. What is the Institute?
Well, the U.S. Institute of Peace is a national, nonpartisan, independent public institute that was founded by Congress and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan in 1984. Its mission is to prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflicts abroad. That's its mandate. We do so in several ways. We do trainings, we had peace games, so instead of war games, we do peace games, dialogue, high-level meetings around tables. We also engage directly in conflict zones by providing analysis, education, resources for those working for peace in those countries. We have a bipartisan board of directors, so we try to remain fair in that regard. We work on both sides of the aisle when it comes to policies. Just like there are institutes and academies to study war and how to win it, the concept of having an institute to study peace is actually something that was conceptualized as early as George Washington, who expressed a desire for this, but it didn't materialize until nearly 200 years later. It started with a grassroots movement in the 60s and 70s with veterans and members of Congress who were veterans who really wanted to have an institute that was dedicated to understanding how to prevent wars. And they understood truly what the cost of war was, right? The irreversible damage of war, monetarily, health-wise, in all sorts of ways. They actually saw war firsthand and saw their comrades fall in battle, and they know the cost of it. So in the 60s and 70s, the idea got traction, and then it really started going forward from there. It was signed into law by President Ronald Reagan in 1984, so we're funded primarily by Congress. Our beautiful building, that was the exception that was done by private donations, but just the building. So our funding primarily comes from Congress, although we do one-off projects with other organizations and agencies like the State Department, USAID, and they'll help fund projects with us.
So it's more of a partnership with these other organizations as opposed to, because I believe one of the criticisms that DOGE used to justify shutting it down was that, oh, well, all these organizations are doing the exact same work anyways. We don't need multiple organizations doing the same thing. But they weren't doing the same thing. It was a partnership with these other organizations on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and we even had these partnerships with the Pentagon and others that were in Department of Defense. So we're not just about compassion and charity, which are important things, but we also have a very big security purpose as well for our country.
And that makes total sense, because you want there to be peace. You don't want all of these conflicts.
Right. You know that just preventing conflicts from happening through force, there's going to be pushed out animosity that lives in the hearts of people after these kinds of things. And to be able to have the soft power and understanding and knowledge of how to resolve those conflicts in ways that don't result in violence is in a way protection, security, ensures lasting peace.
And you said soft power, and I think that's something that the current administration doesn't really appreciate or understand, or many people in America don't really understand what that is. Because when they see power, they think military power, they think influence, the ability to say, hey, you are doing what I want you to do. So would you explain a little bit more what soft power is, like what that concept is?
I don't have a formal definition in front of me, but it's the ability to transform and influence relationships in a way that leads to positive outcomes without having to use force. I will caveat and say it's a fool's errand to just try and control the hearts and minds of everyone, because that's not possible. But we know that if you do something that harms someone else or causes a grievance, you're going to build resentment and distrust in them. And it always happens that distrust and resentment is going to lead to actions that go directly against peacefulness. Resentment and peace can't coexist. I mean, it's like that concept of what goes around comes around. Simple, but even so, I've heard some people argue you can't just put goodwill into the world and expect the exact same thing in return. And sure, sometimes it is still met with aggression or belligerent behavior. But I say it's even more certain that if you do treat others wrongfully, you're going to see unwanted outcomes. If not in the short term, then definitely in the long term. So it's better to still put forth good out into the world.
It's a lot of building relationships. I know USAID is another example of really using soft power and examples of going in to build a community and help with humanitarian resources. So what you're doing is building relationships there. And even though you're not putting the military right there, we're like, oh, wait, okay, we're doing this project together. We know we can trust you. And that helps the United States stay secure because it builds partnerships.
So it's partnerships it's building partnerships as opposed to dictating what happens. I think that's very important, especially talking about the Christ-like aspects of the U.S. government and the Christ-like mission of the Institute of Peace to build peace building. You don't do that with force. You don't invade somebody peacefully. You build partnerships with them and establish a firm, lasting relationship.
The other thing I didn't mention too is that our budget is typically very small compared to the entire defense budget in the United States. It's around $55 million average annually from Congress, and that's equivalent to a penny compared to Department of Defense's budget.
You know, foreign aid consists of only like 1% of the federal budget, which is very, very small. I think most people assume that foreign aid consists of a lot more.
I've heard of that actually, and I've seen some interviews with people asking like, what do you think the U.S. foreign aid budget should be? And they're like, I think 5 to 10% would be a good amount of foreign aid, but we're way higher than that, and they don't realize that a 5% foreign aid budget would literally change the entire world.
And that's what we do. We do a lot with a little money. All of our efforts are on a very small budget. And imagine if we had more, what we could do. But yeah, in a sense, we're a cost-efficient option and we do a lot with what we have.
Let's talk for a second about some of those projects. So we've talked about what the the Institute is in a general sense. What are some of the teams or the projects within the Institute? Like, what are some of the things that they do?
Well, we have thematic teams and we had regional teams. We had teams that focused on specific countries and areas across the globe. We also have field offices in places around the world. And then we also have thematic teams, which worked on things like specific topics, like peace processes.
Gender, religion. We had a governance team that worked closely with the State Department. We had a women peace and security team, youth peace and security team. We did a lot of good work.
We covered a lot of ground on all topics that could relate to what things might devolve into conflict and how do we study that. For instance, we worked with ongoing peace processes in Colombia and everything that came after the peace agreement that they had with their warring military groups. So the U.S. Institute of Peace directly worked with setting up, supporting their post-conflict judicial systems. And then we also trained Colombian officers on implementing and designing ceasefire mechanisms. And so those are peaceful processes, right? Those are things to promote peace.
And yeah, for some of the thematic team examples, the thematic teams often would work individually, but also at times would partner with our country teams. So some examples of that kind of collaboration within the Institute is that in Iraq, USIP actually facilitated interreligious reconciliation efforts among Sunnis and Shia after the US invaded Iraq in 2003, and led to the change to hold a high-level dialogue in 2007 that resulted in a declaration condemning religiously motivated sectarian violence. Then in Nigeria, the Institute worked to counter Boko Haram by forming Muslim and Christian partnerships to build trust among religious leaders in their communities. And we also do a lot of stuff here in the US by providing trainings and gatherings of US religious leaders, US policymakers, government officials, to equip them, with the skills that they need to support domestic and international conflict transformation and contribute to the overall goal of global peacemaking.
We did that work, and then we had, field offices, like I mentioned. We had a big field office in Afghanistan, and before everything collapsed, we helped shape U.S. and NATO stabilization efforts with research on traditional Afghan systems of justice. We worked on courses on conflict resolution at universities there, and so we worked with a lot of groups on working with the government and how to resolve disputes with different land pieces and people there. It's a very diverse place.
There is the Vietnam Wartime Accounting Initiative that the Institute had been working on.
It's a multi-year project to help with public education, government to government, and even people-to-people dialogue between Vietnamese and Americans. It's trying to address leftover legacies of the war, like Agent Orange, unexploded ordnance, and the recovery of wartime remains.
So those families can be at peace. Incredible work that team is doing.
Because it's just amazing that after a huge war like that and a lot of animosity that they could have towards the U.S. given everything, it didn't quite happen that way. And then we have this great relationship, and I think it's a lot of the willingness of the cooperation, the friendliness, but just there's a lot of that soft power at play. That kind of work is an important part of the wider work of building a strong partnership with other countries.
The Vietnam example that you just gave, that is an incredible example, because people don't even think about what happens after the war. And you think of the rebuilding, but not all of the families that have been torn apart, not just in America, but also in Vietnam. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I guess just kind of adding to the peace processes thing, our team, I don't think we were fully involved in Afghanistan at this point to be able to advise on this process. But after the U.S. had entered into Afghanistan, the Taliban had been defeated, and they reached out saying they wanted to be part of peace talks, an agreement, negotiate, figure out how they could be involved in this process. They were excluded from the get-go. And then later, back in 2002 and 2003, they said senior Taliban leadership sat down and said they wanted to have peace talks. It wasn't really a U.S. priority at that time anymore. Focus was shifting to Iraq, resources were shifting to Iraq, and so that was never something they got interested in. So they were shoved off to the side. And so you can't help but wonder, looking back, there were times later when we tried to reach out and they were non-compliant. So we feel like we kind of missed that window, and thinking about where we would be now without having spent 20 years and over $2 trillion in Afghanistan, and nothing's changed. It's gotten worse. So all of that money, all of that time, and the lives of American people, and the things that we're advocating for now, just like the example of the Colombian government, Colombian officials working to help bring in those who are part of the violent factions into those peace talks, that's important. And it's hard to measure peace. It's hard to measure how one might prevent war. It's hard to measure something that didn't happen, right? It's hard to prove a negative. But you look at this example in Afghanistan, you wonder if we could have included them earlier. Would we be seeing the things that we're seeing today? looking back at the steps that if we could have applied a lot of the principles that we advocate for, what could have happened differently. And I push people to really think about that when it comes to our work and how this could be expanded.